What if I told you that the person who appears to be the strongest in the room could actually be the one hurting the most deep inside, behind the arrogance, the manipulation, and the constant desire to control others? There is often a serious emotional struggle that most people never notice. And if you have ever dealt with someone like this in your life, make sure you stay until the end, because understanding these behaviors can completely change the way you protect your peace and energy. One of the biggest signs that a narcissist is secretly suffering is their constant and almost desperate need for validation. On the outside, it can look like confidence. They speak about their achievements, overstate their importance, and try to take control of conversations. But underneath all of that is a very fragile sense of self that depends heavily on how other people react to them. A mentally healthy person can still feel secure even when nobody is watching. A narcissist usually cannot. Their self-worth is built almost completely on outside approval. And the moment that approval fades away, the emptiness underneath becomes impossible for them to avoid. That is why narcissists constantly search for compliments, praise, attention, or admiration. They may repeat their successes again and again, not because they are proud in a balanced way, but because they need reassurance that they are important. Without that reassurance, the image they have created for themselves slowly begins to fall apart. Imagine trying to hold up a giant wall with no real foundation underneath it. Every compliment becomes another brick keeping the wall standing. Every moment of attention keeps the illusion alive. But the second people stop validating them, insecurity and anxiety begin rushing in. You may notice how uncomfortable they become whenever someone else receives praise or recognition. Instead of celebrating another person, they often interrupt, redirect the conversation, or try to outshine the person getting attention. This reaction is not just arrogance. It reveals how threatened they feel when they are no longer the center of admiration. Another person's success can feel like proof that they are losing value in the eyes of others. Another thing that reveals this suffering is how strongly they react to silence or indifference. Criticism hurts them, but being ignored can feel even more painful. When people stop responding to their stories, their bragging, or their attempts to impress others, it creates deep emotional discomfort. The reason is simple. Without constant reactions from people around them, they are forced to face a version of themselves that feels empty, uncertain, and insecure. That is the hidden struggle behind the endless need for attention and validation. Another major sign that a narcissist is deeply suffering is their extreme sensitivity to criticism. On the surface, they usually present themselves as confident, powerful, and unaffected by the opinions of others. They may act as if nothing can shake them emotionally. But in reality, even small criticism can feel like a direct attack on their identity. What may seem like normal feedback to most people can trigger an intense emotional response in a narcissist because their self-image is incredibly fragile underneath the surface. For emotionally healthy people, criticism can feel uncomfortable, but it can also be processed, reflected on, and even used as a tool for growth. A narcissist struggles to do that. Their identity depends on the belief that they must appear superior, flawless, and completely in control. When somebody points out a mistake, weakness, or flaw, it threatens the carefully created image they rely on to feel emotionally stable. Instead of viewing criticism as information, they experience it as humiliation and rejection. This is why their reactions to criticism are often dramatic and extreme. They may become defensive, angry, or even aggressive very quickly. Sometimes they immediately attack the person criticizing them in order to shift the attention away from themselves. Other times, they completely deny the criticism and refuse to admit there is any possibility they could be wrong. In some situations, they may even present themselves as the victim, acting as if they are being unfairly attacked or misunderstood by everyone around them. What makes these reactions so revealing is how fast their emotional state can suddenly change. A person who looked charming, confident, and calm one moment can instantly become cold, sarcastic, hostile, or distant the second their ego feels threatened. This sudden switch is not random at all. It reflects the internal panic that happens when their self-image is challenged. Beneath these reactions is a deep fear of being exposed. Criticism threatens to reveal the insecurity and self-doubt they work so hard to hide from the world because they cannot tolerate that feeling of exposure. They fight against it through denial, anger, blame, or emotional manipulation. The intensity of their reaction often says much more about their internal suffering than the criticism itself ever could. Another strong sign that a narcissist is secretly suffering is their constant envy and comparison with other people. Even though they often present themselves as superior, successful, or more capable than everyone around them, there is usually a deep insecurity operating quietly beneath the surface. Instead of feeling secure in who they are, they measure their value by constantly comparing themselves to others. Every achievement they witness, every compliment another person receives, and every moment somebody else shines can trigger uncomfortable emotions inside them. This envy is not always obvious in the way people expect. A narcissist may never openly admit that they feel jealous. In fact, they often hide it behind sarcasm, criticism, or subtle attempts to minimize another person's success. When somebody achieves something meaningful, the narcissist may immediately point out flaws, question whether the success was deserved, or quickly redirect attention back toward themselves. These reactions are not simply arrogance. They reveal a deep discomfort with the possibility that someone else could be admired, valued, or respected more than them. For a narcissist, another person's success can feel like a personal threat. Their identity depends heavily on being viewed as exceptional or superior. When somebody else stands out, it challenges that belief and creates emotional instability inside them. Instead of feeling inspired by another person's success, they often experience resentment, anxiety, and frustration because it forces them to question their own worth. This constant comparison creates nonstop emotional pressure. They feel driven to appear more successful, more admired, or more impressive than everyone around them. If they cannot achieve that image naturally, they may exaggerate their accomplishments, seek attention in unhealthy ways, or try to bring other people down in order to restore the feeling of superiority they desperately crave. Living with this amount of envy and comparison is emotionally draining. It stops them from experiencing genuine happiness for others and traps them in a mindset where their value always depends on being better than someone else. Behind the surface confidence, this pattern reflects a deep and ongoing struggle with insecurity and self-worth. Another sign that a narcissist is deeply suffering is the emotional instability that appears whenever they lose control. Narcissists often try to control situations, conversations, and even the emotions of the people around them. Control gives them a sense of safety and stability. It allows them to maintain the image they want others to see while avoiding situations where their weaknesses could be exposed. But when that control starts slipping away, their emotional reactions can become intense, unpredictable, and sometimes shocking. In everyday life, this may happen when someone disagrees with them, sets a firm boundary, or refuses to follow their expectations. Even a small loss of control can trigger a reaction that feels completely out of proportion to the situation. They may become defensive, angry, dismissive, or suddenly very cold. In some moments, they may explode with frustration, and in others, they may completely withdraw and give the silent treatment. These reactions are not random mood swings. They often reflect the deep discomfort they feel whenever they can no longer manage how other people see them. Control helps a narcissist maintain their sense of superiority and emotional stability. When they feel in charge, they can guide conversations, shape how people view them, and keep attention focused exactly where they want it. But the moment somebody challenges that control, emotional chaos begins to build inside them. It forces them into a situation where they must face uncertainty, criticism, rejection, or failure, all of which threaten the identity they work so hard to protect. This is why many narcissists react strongly when people begin setting healthy boundaries. A simple refusal or disagreement can make them feel powerless and emotionally exposed. Instead of calmly accepting limits, they may try to manipulate the situation, guilt the other person, or escalate conflict in order to regain control again. If those methods fail, the emotional reaction can become even stronger because they are forced to face the uncomfortable reality that they cannot always dominate every situation or every person around them. Behind these reactions is a fragile emotional system that struggles to handle uncertainty and loss of power. When control disappears, the insecurity and anxiety that were being managed through dominance suddenly rise to the surface, exposing the deeper suffering hidden behind their constant need to control everything around them. Another revealing sign that a narcissist is deeply suffering is the quiet isolation that slowly develops around them over time. At first, narcissists often seem surrounded by people. They can appear charming, charismatic, confident, and exciting to be around. Many people are drawn toward them in the beginning because narcissists know how to create strong first impressions. They often know exactly what to say, how to gain attention, and how to make themselves appear important or attractive. But over time, the relationships around them often begin to weaken and fall apart. The reason this happens is because relationships built on manipulation, control, and constant validation cannot stay healthy for long. Eventually, people begin noticing the emotional exhaustion that comes from always dealing with the narcissist's need for attention, admiration, and power. Friends may start distancing themselves. Romantic partners may feel emotionally drained. Family members may begin setting boundaries to protect their own mental peace. Slowly, the narcissist starts experiencing emotional isolation, even if people are still physically around them. One of the painful truths about narcissism is that it becomes very difficult for them to build deep and genuine emotional connections. Real intimacy requires honesty, vulnerability, empathy, and mutual respect. Narcissists often struggle with these qualities because vulnerability feels dangerous to them. Instead of opening up emotionally, they protect themselves through control, ego, and emotional walls. As a result, many of their relationships remain shallow, unstable, or filled with tension and conflict. Over time, this creates loneliness that they rarely admit openly. Even when surrounded by people, they may still feel emotionally disconnected inside. Because their relationships are often based on admiration rather than true emotional connection, they constantly fear rejection, abandonment, or losing their source of validation. This fear can make them clingy in some situations and emotionally distant in others. The more their relationships fail, the more bitterness and frustration can build inside them. Instead of reflecting honestly on their behavior, they may blame others, call people disloyal, or convince themselves that nobody truly understands them. But beneath all of those defenses is often a person struggling with deep emotional emptiness and loneliness. This hidden isolation is one of the clearest signs of the suffering that exists beneath the narcissist's carefully constructed image. They can appear charming, confident, and extremely skilled at pulling people in. In the beginning stages of relationships, whether those relationships are friendships, family bonds, or romantic connections, they often seem charismatic, exciting, and deeply engaging. People may feel drawn to their energy, their confidence, and the way they know how to command attention in a room. But as more time passes, a different pattern slowly begins to appear. The manipulation, emotional unpredictability, criticism, and need for control eventually begin pushing people away. Many narcissists struggle to keep healthy long-term relationships because their constant need for admiration and emotional control slowly creates tension with the people closest to them. Those around them may begin feeling emotionally exhausted, unseen, or constantly evaluated and criticized. With enough time, some people start distancing themselves in order to protect their emotional peace and mental well-being. Others may stay physically close while emotionally disconnecting, no longer offering the same trust, warmth, or openness they once shared. For the narcissist, this slow loss of emotional connection can create a painful inner conflict. On one side, they strongly desire attention, praise, validation, and emotional importance from others. But on the other side, their own behaviors often damage the very relationships that provide those feelings. This creates a repeating cycle where they feel lonely, disconnected, and misunderstood, while at the same time struggling to recognize how their own actions helped create the problem. Instead of honestly acknowledging the role they may have played in pushing people away, they often interpret the situation differently. They may convince themselves that other people are jealous of them, ungrateful toward them, or simply incapable of appreciating their value. This belief helps protect their self-image, but it also prevents them from facing the deeper emotional issue underneath everything. Because of this, the isolation continues growing slowly over the years. This creates a strange emotional reality in their lives. They may continue chasing attention through social settings, work environments, relationships, or online spaces, but genuine emotional closeness becomes increasingly rare. The relationships that remain often begin to feel shallow, unstable, conditional, or transactional. Beneath the outward confidence and constant need for admiration, there is frequently a quiet but persistent loneliness. It is the hidden result of a lifelong pattern where protecting the ego slowly becomes more important than building honest, emotionally supportive, and authentic human connections. Another major sign that a narcissist is deeply suffering is the intense fear of being exposed. On the outside, they often work extremely hard to present an image of confidence, intelligence, success, power, or superiority. They carefully manage how other people see them, highlighting their strengths while hiding anything that could make them seem weak, flawed, insecure, or emotionally vulnerable. This image becomes incredibly important because it protects the fragile sense of self they are constantly trying to maintain. Behind that image, however, there is usually a deep and ongoing anxiety that someone may eventually discover the truth. The truth that they are not as perfect as they pretend to be, not as powerful as they want others to believe, and not nearly as emotionally secure as they appear on the surface. This fear of exposure can quietly shape many of their behaviors and reactions. They may avoid situations where their abilities could realistically be questioned, or they may become highly uncomfortable when conversations begin moving toward deeper honesty and emotional accountability. You may notice how uneasy they become when discussions shift toward vulnerability, self-reflection, or personal responsibility. If someone calmly points out contradictions in their stories or behaviors, the narcissist may quickly change the subject, become defensive, or attack the person who raised the concern. These reactions are often attempts to stop the possibility that their carefully created image could begin to crack. This fear also explains why many narcissists spend enormous amounts of energy trying to control how others perceive them. They may exaggerate accomplishments, reshape stories to make themselves appear better, or dismiss and devalue people who challenge their version of reality. Protecting the image becomes a constant psychological effort. Nearly every interaction becomes an opportunity to reinforce the version of themselves they desperately want the world to accept and admire. Living with this constant fear of exposure creates continuous internal pressure. It means they are rarely able to fully relax into authenticity, because doing so would risk revealing the insecurity they are desperately trying to hide. Instead of feeling genuinely secure in who they feel forced to constantly perform a role that always appears impressive, strong, and emotionally untouchable. Beneath that performance is often a quiet but ongoing fear that one day someone will see beyond the mask and expose the vulnerability they spent years trying to conceal. Another strong sign that a narcissist is deeply suffering is the hidden shame they carry beneath their outward confidence. Although they may appear proud, superior, arrogant, or self-important, these behaviors often function as emotional armor protecting them from a painful inner feeling they struggle to face directly. That feeling is a deep sense of inadequacy and shame that often developed long before many of their narcissistic behaviors fully appeared. Shame is very different from ordinary embarrassment. Embarrassment is temporary and connected to a specific moment or mistake. Shame goes much deeper than that. Shame creates the painful belief that something is fundamentally wrong with who you are as a person. For many narcissists, this feeling quietly exists beneath the surface of their identity. Because it is so emotionally uncomfortable, they build psychological defenses designed to keep it hidden, not only from other people but also from themselves. This is one reason narcissists often react so strongly when their flaws, mistakes, or weaknesses are pointed out. Even small criticism does not simply feel like feedback to them. Instead, it can trigger the much deeper feeling of shame they have spent years trying to escape. When that happens, they may react with anger, denial, blame, emotional attacks, or attempts to humiliate the person who confronted them. These reactions are often desperate attempts to push the shame away before it fully rises to the surface. To emotionally protect themselves from this inner pain, narcissists frequently create a self-image that appears completely opposite from shame. They may present themselves as exceptional, highly successful, unusually intelligent, superior, or more capable than the people around them. In many cases, the stronger the inner shame becomes, the stronger the outer performance grows. This is one reason some narcissists become deeply obsessed with status, recognition, admiration, or public success. These external forms of validation temporarily quiet the inner voice, constantly questioning their worth and